Miami gets put on the musical map in 1948 when Henry Stone comes to town. Now, Henry Stone is one of the original round table of black music independent moguls. All black music in 1940s was independent. There was no such thing as a major label for black music. So this round table had a lockhold on what the music was, and what the music was to be, how it got marketed, how it got promoted. And the king of the landscape at that time was the jukeboxes. You go juke joints across country, and Henry Stone serviced the jukeboxes as a distributor. A lot of people have taken credit for how they brainstormed this. Henry is certainly one of these people who brainstormed and takes credit for it, of giving a stack of records after manufacture to train porters, to those who worked on the trains, still being the dominant transportation source nationwide at that time. And he would pay them a certain amount of money. They'd take it across country, deliver it to jukebox operators or someone who could distribute locally, and then make a profit that way. That was known as seminal distribution. These were all 78s. There was only one format at that time, and that was 78 RPM records. As a couple different record labels and the majors, I think Columbia and RCA, started to battle over new formats to outdo the other. Between the 12-inch long play at 33 and the 45 single, the landscape changed. And Henry Stone realized he no longer could work his infrastructure. Aside from the train porters, there was also the shelving units in record stores and such. And obviously jukeboxes were equipped for 78s only. What happens when they change? Who they change to? 33 long plays, 45 single plays. So there was confusion in the air at the time about which way the direction was going. So instead of Henry waiting around and not getting paid, he took a deal in Cincinnati, of all places, with King Records, the notorious King Records. He could run his own subsidiary. Federal was the black music label of King. King was mostly known for country music, specifically hillbilly bop. Great hits with people like Moon Mullican, but more importantly with Federal, that was the black music label, and this is where Henry looked towards. Henry ran Deluxe, but he looked at Federal and wondered what his inspiration and input was there. And at one point, Henry got a call from the owner of King, Sid Nathan, and said, "We heard this acetate, this test pressing record down in Augusta, Georgia. Could you please go down and check this out?" So he gets in his car and drives up from Miami, which is a fairly long drive from Miami to Augusta. But Sid Nathan also called a guy in Alabama, one of his other subsidiaries. And that guy drove across from Alabama to Augusta. Well, Alabama's closer than Miami, so the other guy got there first. Check out this acetate and track down this guy. This is 1956, and that guy turned out to be James Brown. He really, truly put black Southern music on the map in a concrete way that would last for decades. Now the issue there is Henry had a moderate hand at getting James Brown signed to the King family. Signed to Federal, not Deluxe, as a result. However, Henry Stone has always had a hand in fostering what James Brown would become. When James Brown lost his record deal in the 70s and 80s, Henry Stone was there to pick him up and make sure he continued to put out records in the early 80s until James Brown could rebound, go back into the majors. Henry Stone's been key. He's got him many performance gigs in Overtown as well as Miami Beach. All the big name jazz artists that came to Miami Beach to perform, of course, after they perform in these mob run hotels, they'd be sent over to Overtown to sleep overnight, and then they'd continue performing there in Overtown at small bars there. Very notable clubs there, and eventually theaters there. Overtown came into its own right, undoubtedly. Now, 1958, there's an entirely different music mogul, if you want to call him a mogul, who comes to prominence in Florida, in South Florida. Mac Emerman. Mac Emerman was an amateur recorder. He brought around portable recording equipment, specifically jazz. Mac Emerman was a jazz enthusiast, and in the late 50s, that's about as good as you can get. That was the greatest thing happening. And in 1959, the debut disc jockey convention came to town. And this changed all of the music industry. And there becomes a nexus between Mac Emerman and this convention. Mac Emerman was just trying to go around town with his portable recorder and record all these jazz concerts while they were in town, because all these bands followed where the disc jockeys were. But the disc jockeys were living it up. And during one drunken night, I'll say, maybe more, Miami Herald came to interview the disc jockeys and said, "So what really goes on here?" And they were open. They said, basically, we get paid off to play records. Their prostitutes abound. We can have the time of our life here. Well, these disc jockeys certainly didn't want the news to get out that they were prostitutes. They were married. So this changed the music industry. Payola was not illegal. It was 100% legal at the time. The issue was they didn't want their wives to know that prostitutes were being part of how they were being paid to play these records. So they did whatever they could to suppress the story, or at least to edit the story. And by editing what was their reality, the other part surfaced. Now payola is on the center stage. Disc jockeys get paid money to play records, which means if you don't have money, you don't get your record played. And that's key to the music industry. Now Congress wants to know, is this something that's an ethical dilemma? They had just busted the quiz shows. Quiz shows were paying off contestants to tell the wrong answers to get more charismatic people to win the quiz shows. It's time to look over here at this payola issue. Is this the same issue? Should we be doing something about this? So 1959, it all surfaced in November. 1960, Congress stepped in, outlawed payola. The very next year, 61, the 60s officially begin. 60s music changes dramatically from what the 50s rock and roll or R&B or however you want to label it was. So things change. And where Mac Emerman comes into play was they wanted to record a Peggy Lee album because she was performing with the Count Basie Orchestra, if I'm correct. I could be wrong in the orchestra, but I'm pretty sure. It's two big names. And he couldn't. There's no real studio in town. So that suggests there should be a real studio in Miami. So Mac Emerman meets with a television engineer, one of the early television. This is the early days of television when television was very small. And they built Mac Emerman boards to record on. And these boards do okay for a while. But when Mac went to replace one piece of equipment at the local quote-unquote hi-fi store, this is where he meets Jeep Harnard. Jeep Harnard is the genius that turns Miami into a recording capital. He single-handedly builds these masterworks of recording boards that the rest of the world followed for the next 2 decades.